Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? All right, so thank you very much to the APA for inviting me to present. And today we'll be looking at substance abuse through a trauma lens, right? So I'm glad that there are so many providers here in the private system and the public system. We're seeing Keys, DES, because the topic that I'm going to speak on will affect children, and these are the entities that are working with children, right? I will say some things that not everyone will agree with, but at least of a discussion. And I've done a presentation before, and at the end, the lady came to me very serious, and she was like, no matter what you say, I don't think children should use drugs. And I was like, I wonder if she knew I don't sell them drugs. And if I was selling them drugs, I wouldn't need this job, right? So, with that in mind, let's move to our disclaimer. So during this presentation, I will be talking about children using substance abuse and providing explanations for why this is happening. I am not suggesting at any point that I'm saying children should be using drugs, right? Nor am I suggesting that people should sell drugs, so that's my second disclaimer. All right, so what are we going to be doing today? So we want to differentiate what is using a substance versus being addicted to a substance. We look at why persons medicate, or the self-medication hypothesis. We'll be looking at the biological reasons and the psychological reasons why persons use drugs and are addicted to drugs. And so that is not just Dr. Davis making it up. We look at what the research is saying as well. And I think the theme so far, we're saying, let the focus not solely be on the fact that children are using drugs, but what are the underlying reasons that they're using drugs so that we can now act. So we'll be looking at substance use, abuse, and dependence, and just making the distinction. So substance use refers to the use of any substance with mind-altering property. And when we're talking about abuse now, the person is using the substance to the level that it's affecting functioning. So what does that look like for a child? Getting into conflicts with parents, missing class, being hungover after using a substance, for example. And it is now dependence when the person continues using the substance, even though they're seeing that there are negative consequences. And using the substance is now so important that getting the substance is almost like the main reason why they're alive. So, when persons reach the level of dependence, or what we're saying now, addiction, they need increased amount of drugs to feel as good. So what usually happens if a person has a mental health diagnosis for a substance use disorder, the first time they take a drug, they feel really, really, really good, right? And they spend the rest of the time trying to take the drug, hoping that they can catch that feeling again, but they never do. So they keep taking more and more and more and more. And we can see why some persons end up overdosing. And if they try to stop using the drug, they have withdrawal symptoms. And if they completely stop the drug, then they have withdrawal symptoms. And what do you think that will do? It will make them want to start back, because if I take this drug, I feel good. If I try to stop it, I feel bad. What would you do? You'd continue, right? Right. And so a large portion of the time now is spent seeking out the drug. So that's when it's now a disorder. That's when it's a mental illness. And I said that already, right? So the question now becomes, we know teenagers are using drugs. They did the sisters, and Dr. Lamb presented the data. But the reason why they're using it, are they using it because they're treating themselves, or are they addicted? Right? And so we'll be looking at some of the reasons. And again, I am not saying children should use drugs. I'm just trying to explain the underlying reason. And I'm not going to just read through all of that, but I'm just going to give you a scenario now. Imagine you went to work and your boss shouted at you. You went home, something bad happened. What would you do to feel better on that day? And you can just shout it out. drink, eat some ice cream, glass of wine, right? And what if the kids were giving you lots of trouble and you just couldn't take it anymore and the husband was a problem and the wife was a problem? What would you do? You would want to? You would want to leave that era, right? What would you do? You'd go to a movie, you would meet up with friends, right? So imagine that child's day. They go to school, the teacher say, what is 1 + 1? The kids say 3. Teacher say, you idiot. They feel bad in front of all their friends. They go home, mother say, how was school? The teacher shouted at me, why? I thought 1 + 1 was 3. Mother say, you idiot. I know it's 8 o'clock and the kid is stressed out. What do you say? Go to bed. The kid has no reprieve from all the stress that they just faced. But if it was you, when the kid is gone to bed, you would get a nice glass of wine, put on your Netflix, or you call your best friend. But we're in control. At the level of school, the adults are in control of what a child does. True? When they go home, the parents are in charge of what they do. And so they have very little control, and we are controlling every aspect of their life. So when they're stressed out, what do you think that they're going to do? Find the easiest thing. So I can sneak a little alcohol in school because everybody thinks it's water in this bottle. But vodka is the same color as water, right? And they're like, wow, this kid is really good at hydrating. Right? 1 bottle every day, well hydrated. And so we can see that there are many reasons why persons may want to use drugs. So we look at social integration. So specifically, the research was looking at e-cigarettes. I don't know if they specified if it was the ones with nicotine or the flavored ones. But the flavored ones don't have mind-altering property. So why are the children using it? So when they use it, they bond. And so they're now a part of a community that smoke and they don't feel alone. Right? So most of the times when children are using drugs, they are not addicted. Most times, the parents don't even know. Right? So literally, there are children in my clinic that I'm seeing, mom say, Doc, starting this medication was a godsend. The kid is doing so much better. She don't smoke, she don't drink. The kid come and say, well, I smoke every now and then, sometimes twice per week. But the reason why the parent doesn't know is that it's helping them to function better. And that is treatment, that is not addiction. But what was the disclaimer? Very good, so we're on the same page. So, when we're looking at self-medication hypothesis, we're saying that there's no one that is not going through some form of distress. Nobody's life is perfect. True? Some substances alleviate physical and emotional pain. Some substances just make you feel better. Right? Persons who are self-medicating are using the drugs to relieve their emotional distress and to feel better about themselves. They are only using the drugs when they feel it's necessary. So the drug is not the thing controlling their behavior, right? So with an addict, we say first the man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes the man. But if someone is using it for self-medication, they use it whenever they feel they need to. On the same page still? Good. So in an addict, the overwhelming drive now is not to go to school and learn, is not to have friends, but how can I feel this good again by taking the right amount of drug to feel this good again? So, how do we get here? So there are two main psychological theories that I look at. I look at positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So one of the ways in which this helps to fuel continued drug use is that if you use a drug, let's say in this case marijuana, and you realize, I'm a good person, I feel real nice. The very reward of feeling good if you smoke makes you want to smoke the next time. And it's the same principle that the teachers employ where they say, oh, you're such a good kid, stars, A+, and the kid say, you know what, that feels good. I'll work towards that next time. And then later we look at the biology of how rewarding behaviors lead to continuous behavior in the future, all right? All right, so Any questions so far following that? Good. The questions are at the end. All right, so in negative reinforcement now, if something feels unpleasant, you take away this unpleasantness, I am more likely to continue the thing that takes away my unpleasant feeling. And later we'll explain why the good kid's boyfriend is a drug dealer. Yeah, that segue? All right, so let's look at the biology of addiction. So when we're saying addiction is not a choice. The first time you use a substance is the choice. And then after that, now, the mental illness takes over. Persons who are addicted are more likely to have other illnesses like anxiety, depression, or any other mental diagnosis. Importantly, and we've been saying it so far, persons who are addicted are more likely to have had multiple ACEs, right? Especially domestic violence and childhood neglect. So, this is what they call a functional scan. It looks how the brain is supposed to be working based on the kind of chemicals that are being released. The more red you have, it means that the brain is functioning in the way that it is supposed to, right? So the nice bright red areas mean that the brain is functioning nice. And you can see right here, this is the front of the brain. This is the part of the brain that is responsible for good decision making, focusing, concentrating, learning, planning, all those wonderful stuff. If you look at the other image over here, you'll realize that those red areas are significantly less, meaning that persons who have an issue with addiction, their decision making is very poor. And as we go on, we'll explain why when the young girls, for example, in care run away and they have negative consequences, they continue to run away because decision making is very poor. All right, so remember we had said before, when a person has a diagnosis of addiction, they continue to seek out the substance. So what happens now, if you can see the front of the brain that is responsible for decision making, and this part of the brain is involved in the reward system. So, for example, imagine if you had a very long day at work, you didn't get any break, and your bladder was very full, right? And you go to the bathroom and relieve yourself. How do you feel? You're like, right? Sometimes I get pins and needles. I don't know if that happened to anybody else. But you just feel relieved. It's just like the weight of the world lifted, right? And it feels good. So this is the part of the brain that says, okay, peeing after a long day feels really good. And so next time your bladder is full, what would you do? Shout it now. You're going to pee, right? But for the ladies now, because this is not common in men, imagine if you had a bladder infection and when you go to pee, it feels like you're peeing out razor blades. Right? At the end of the day, the next day, would you want to go and pee? No. Right? But if you took some medication to take away the pain, so take away something bad, would you go and pee? Right. Yes, so it's a similar concept. So when persons take the drug the first time, this area right here, which is the pleasure center, gets flooded with chemicals, and you feel real good. It also sends a signal to the front of the brain. All right, we're going to plan for this. We're going to see this out. This is the thing that makes sense. Because you know what? Being in school when they're saying x squared plus 3x plus 1 factorized does not feel as good as smoking this spliff. That feels much better than sitting in class still all day. True? So that's how the behavior continues to get reinforced. So let's look at trauma very quickly, right? So it's very important to understand that you can be traumatized not only from experiencing the trauma. So we look at trauma can be witnessed, and persons working in mental health would see where the kid that presents with a mental health diagnosis is not the one that was beaten every day, but is the sister, is the brother that witnessed it, the golden child. And everybody's like, why that one mad? It should be the other one, right? But we don't say mad in mental health, true? But that's just the truth. So how you perceive what you're experiencing is the trauma. So there is no single event that is universally traumatic. We get that? How you perceive an event is what trauma is. So for example, I had a friend who was picked up late from school, and it traumatized her. And you'd be like, that's not anything bad, right? But what was her thought process? I am bad and they don't want me anymore. And just that thought lingered with her for the rest of her life. And so one day I was late to pick up my kid, and this is a psychiatrist in training, and she started to freak out. And I couldn't understand. So she's now, not going to give away the age, but years down the line, right? And just the thought of a kid being left at school, she couldn't deal with it. So witnessing is very important. Experiencing and, of course, told. Wait, flip back. Right, so the told part is now important. So this is where the media comes in. When I wake up in the morning, this thing happened in Syria with the earthquake, and there was this shooting, and like it's a steady diet of trauma we're being fed every day. So even if you don't witness it, you get told about it, right? And later on, we'll show some slides about the amount of violence that is being witnessed. And when we think about Cayman as such a small community, when I just came here, there was a dumpster fire, and there was traffic from East End to West Bay. And you kind of get the understanding that if you're in a very small space and there's something traumatic, even if you didn't witness it, somebody will come and tell you about it. And so we can understand that when we're looking at the ACEs, why we have so many ACEs in school, and why we have a population that is so traumatized. Didn't experience it? By tomorrow, you'll get told about it. So, again, we look back at this very important diagram. And if you think about your life now, you can just begin to do a little calculation to see what your ACEs would look like. But a single event can lead to multiple ACEs. So let me give you the scenario. Ready? Husband, keep pressing the wrong thing. All right, so let's say we have a husband who abuses substance, who physically assaults mother. How many ACEs we got so far? 2, right? So she calls the police, they press charges, and he gets incarcerated. 3 ACEs, right? He was abusing the kids emotionally as well. Let's say he wasn't a pervert, and he wasn't doing that one. How many ACEs we got so far? 5. We're going 5, right? So now mother is the only caretaker. She has to work 2 jobs. So in the weekday, she comes in at 10 and she leaves at 5. What we have there? Physical neglect. She's not trying to. If you can't be there physically, can you provide emotional support? No. So a single event can provide multiple ACEs, and when we start to look at it like that, when we have children in school reacting traumatized, we can say like, oh, you're not from a bad home, you're not a bad kid. These are things happening to you. I can understand why you're using drugs, so maybe we need to think about how we can help you, versus this one need to send to Cornerstone and this one need to go to Francis Bud. What's that on? And Bonaventure, right? So, what is the response like to trauma? So this is where, when I work with Keys Foundation, we run into a lot of problems. The girls are constantly running away from the homes, and you're like, where you were from, you were going through all these things. We're trying to provide you a safe environment. You keep running away. But when you're traumatized, the response system to run away is what is triggered. And remember, we're saying when you're traumatized, the part of the brain at the front that should make good decision is not working as it should. Fight, right? So you step on someone's shoe in school, the next thing is a fight. Conflict resolution is not a thing. You're constantly prepared for that. Freeze. So this is the one that is the one that gets detected very lately. Remember, Dr. Lam was saying in grade 10 and grade 11 is where we're seeing now major depression diagnosis. And they're like, but this kid is so bright, they did so well in school. And you ask the teacher, what does he say in class? Nothing. You ask mom, what does he do at home? Nothing. Does he ever get in trouble? Nope. Very good kid. But that's a freeze response. You're not reacting to your environment, you're just present. Fun. So this is where I was alluding to now. So this is when we can get into serious problems. And we see it with girls in the homes, and we see it with other persons too. Like the boyfriend is a drug dealer, and you're like, how does this make sense? Right? But if your boyfriend is a drug dealer, you can get sex, feels good, and drugs, feels good. Which one do you think would feel better? Drugs or sitting in class all day learning arithmetic? And if I can choose between something that feels good and something that doesn't feel bad, what would you choose? You must choose the thing that makes you feel better, right? So if we start seeing it like that, again, we can see when we go to children now and say, you are bad because you're using drugs, and the drug dealer boyfriend says, man, you've been through a lot, I've been through a lot too. Let's smoke and do things. Which one do you think they're going to choose? To be around persons chastising them? Punishing them? No. So, if you weren't listening before, this part now is very, very, very important. Right? All the parts are important, but this part is very, very important. So, when persons are traumatized, and I hope the persons to this side can see, I'm not sure to what extent you can see. This area, the fear center, is activated. Right? And the fear center says, there is danger, run away. So if you can think about watching nature documentary, I think about real life. Have you ever just sneak up on a cat before? Or any animal, what does the animal do? They run away, they don't stop and say, is that you, Dr. Davis? They run away first, right? And when they're way down the road, they look back to see what's happening. Why do you think they wait till they are down the road? They feel safe. Right? So that's very, very important to understand that persons who are using drugs, running away, what they're trying to do is create a safe space. And let's expand it a little. If we were animals in the wild, we would be constantly looking for tigers and lions and so on. We would see those things as dangerous, right? Because if we are in those experiences, we would feel what? What emotions would you feel, for example, if a tiger was there? You'd feel fearful, you would feel nervous, you would feel anxious, right? So that same system that makes you feel fearful and nervous and anxious is the same system that is activated when you sit in a classroom and you think that Sheila is much brighter than you, and her parents are proud of her, and my parents is ashamed of me. And I know I'm going to fail this test, and my mother is going to curse, the teacher is going to say he's not trying hard enough, and what emotion am I feeling there? Nervous, anxious, shame, all those emotions, true? And so it's the same to the brain, it's just like there is danger. Run away. If you go to school and you're going to feel that, don't go to school. But maybe you get in trouble, so just don't go to class. And if I can choose something that makes me feel safer, I will choose the thing that makes me feel safer because this area is well activated, right? But look at the part that's supposed to make sense. Weak connection. So not being in a stressful environment, so this is where negative reinforcement is. When I stay away from class and hang out with the bad kids, we joke, we have a good time, I don't feel anxious and nervous. Right? Do that. But if the thinking brain was in check, you would say, but this is going to lead to more problem. But the connections to the thinking brain is lessened in trauma. All right, so Dr. Lam went through the sisters in detail. So the purpose of this slide is not to give you the details. Look at this slide. Where are children experiencing or witnessing most of the violence? Where? In school and the community. The amount happening at home is still significant. But it's very, very, very important to acknowledge that a lot of the violence that children are experiencing occurs at school and in the community. And I was having a conversation with Shannon where that's something that we need to look at. How do we get down that level of violence in the community? And that's where we have to look at policies between government and non-governmental entities to see what are the strategies they're applying internationally and to look at our context to see what we can do about that. So an important part of looking at data is not just for the sensation. So we could say, oh my God, children are really being exposed to violence, right? And how we interpret data matters. So there's this statistics that says the more ice cream sales you have each year, the more children drown. So we have to be careful how we make the connection to find the solution. So what's the obvious solution for that? If you sell more ice cream, more children drown. What's the obvious solution? Stop selling ice cream. True? No. Who said no? All right, what's the solution? What if I was the devil's advocate and say, what if ice cream sales had nothing to do with children drowning? When would you have increased ice cream sales? Summer. So the children are out of school. And when would you have more swimming? Summer. So the commonality is that people are more likely to drown in the summer. Has nothing to do with ice cream. Right? So when we get the data from the sisters, we can't just look at it and say, wow, this is really bad, and have a knee-jerk. We have to go back now and say, why is this happening, and what's the underlying reason so we can address the underlying reason. I can barely see that, so I'll look over here. So this is a 2022 study, right? Where, remember, we're looking at substance abuse through a trauma lens. So we're saying that children in school are experiencing trauma. Children in their community and homes are experiencing trauma. So this is a 2022 study that essentially showed that if you have 4 ACEs or more, you are more likely to go on to develop mental health challenges, and you are more likely to use substances, right? But if I can reference one of our panel members, she said she had about 7 ACEs. Never smoked a day, never drank, didn't go on to develop mental illness. Why is that? Resilience matters. So the study also shows that if you have a crocus bag of ACEs, but you're resilient, it is protective. So there's hope. So when we look at our sisters and say 60 and 65% exposed to violence, 38% in the home, 38% witnessing life-threatening situation, we can say, but if we build their resilience, they're less likely to go on to use substances, and they're less likely to develop mental illnesses. So this is the takeaway that I want persons to get. There's hope. All right, so this is a study in Canada and after Europe. I think I have almost 2 minutes to wrap up, right? Where they looked at grade 7 and 8 children. And again, it was predictive for persons having mental health challenges, the more ACEs that they had. In this study, about 30% of the children would have symptoms meeting the criteria for anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, conditions like conduct disorder, and ADHD. But very importantly from this study, they also saw that even though this was a significant portion of them having these issues, less than half those persons were receiving mental health care. And later we'll see why getting the mental health care matters. But it's not all hopeless. This study was done in 2021, and instead of just focusing on the problem alone, they looked to see what could we do that was beneficial? So they looked at the persons using substances, and they looked at the ones that weren't using substances, and looked at the traits or factors that would determine if you don't use substance. And so if persons were optimistic, if they were mindful, funnily enough, having social phobia was protective against using substance. What do you think that is? Because remember, we said that children are smoking to bond. If you're afraid of bonding, you're not going to use substances. But I'm not encouraging you to teach persons to have social phobia, right? Again, not a one-to-one solution. Having strong religious beliefs was important as well, and feeling connected to the school. So this is where being in clubs is important, participating in sports, those kind of things where persons feel a sense of community at the school level. So more and more it's been recognized that we need to treat mental health, substance use or disorder as a mental health issue and not a criminal matter. And so the NIH is proposing that as well. And in their study, what they showed clearly was if you punish someone for using substance, it did not decrease the risk that they would continue to use substance. When those persons got a criminal record, it was less likely for them to get a job, right, and create for themselves. So it was more likely to increase generational poverty. And that is something that Shannon will talk about. Trauma passes on from one generation to the next. So, as early as 2004, the ESYTC is the Edinburgh Study for Youth, Truancy, and Crime. What they found was that if you excluded children from school, you know what they did? They came together and they smoked drugs. They drink alcohol, they use drugs. So again, excluding persons from school was counterproductive. And it makes sense. If I was using drugs and you say, well, you can't come to school, which I don't like, you get to stay home. So wait, you're telling me that I didn't want to go to school, and my punishment is that I get to stay home? What do you think they're going to do when they go back to school? Right? So that's how we need to see it. So when persons received intervention and it was sustained, that led to decreased mental health issues, and over time, it actually decreased the amount of substance they were using, because the focus is not on getting them to stop using the substance, it's to address the mental health issue, and that's an effective strategy. So, if we can catch things before that time, it would even be better. So early intervention would be very important. So we're looking at preschool level, basic school, reception, primary school. So remember we said that resilience is protective. So we want to build resilience from the earliest possible time so that you can't escape your aces. If your father beating up your mother, you can't do anything about that. The police are going to have to lock him up. You can't do anything about that. But if from very early we build the resilience through, and for example, through APF, you have programs like Zippy, Apple, and Passport going out in the school. So those things build emotional literacy and will contribute towards building resilience as well. The reality of it is that teachers are out there, they're on the front line, but they went to school to learn to teach. But they're dealing with persons with significant challenges. And as I mentioned before, because Cayman is so small, a traumatic situation happening in Panton is known in Westby. And the people in Westby are still traumatized by what happened in Panton. So the narrow geographic distribution of Cayman creates a setup that the entire population will get traumatized and traumatized frequently. And then you would understand why the sisters is looking like that. And so if we recognize that, we have to create opportunities for care. Parent training will be very important, and sometimes the parent training that is provided is for how to parent a normal child, normal. But we don't have programs that's readily available how to parent traumatized children. And the counseling center, the family resource center, they're doing a very good job. But we have to consider
beyond just the regular parenting things and look at the traumatized portion of the population. How do we give parents resources to parent those children? We're not saying it's going to happen overnight. In fact, most of the change will have to be at a generational level. So for the ones to come, we try to have preventative approach. For the ones going through it now, we make sure that we have intervention. All right, so I've said a lot of that, so we don't need to get into that, but providing safety is a key component of any trauma-informed care. And having safe spaces, very important. So Alex's place, for example, that's a very, very good step as a safe place, right? So we need to be of that mindset, providing safe space for our children. I just want to touch on insurance. We need to look at policy making, like how much can mental health coverage be included. I know with the counseling center, they'll provide care even if you're not a Caymanian. But when the needs are a bit more complex and extensive, and is a permit worker who can't afford to do it, then we need to consider persons like that. And I'm making no suggestion, I'm staying away from politics. But just so that we're clear about that, even if you're a non-Caymanian, your behavior is impacting on Cayman. So what do we do for looking forward? We need to start seeing kids using substance, not as a criminal matter, but as a mental health or medical issue. Revised school exclusion policies have been told, fortunately, the public system does not expel children. But in the private system, persons are still getting expelled. Right? And remember, we say if you're using substance and you have mental health issue and they expel you from school, what will you do? You will continue using substance. So we need to look at that. Once we discover that children are using substance, we don't find ways to punish them, but find ways to care for them. And we're not saying using substance would be all right. So we'll continue to monitor for ongoing use, right? And when persons are now older, 18 plus, and they're using substances, which is against the law, true, do we put them into the regular court system? Or do we find a pathway to care, especially if there's no violence or sexual aspect to the drug use that we're seeing? So I would say that, just to put a bow on it now, kids are using drugs to self-medicate for the most part. Majority of kids are not addicted. Kids use drugs are more likely to have significant trauma and have mental health issues, right? And if we try to exclude these persons from the court system, that leads to a better outcome. And early and continuous intervention for persons who are already using substance is a very effective strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for that very informative and thought-provoking presentation. Now we're going to invite questions from the audience. If you do have a question, just indicate by raising your hand, and one of the mic runners will come and bring you a mic so that everybody can hear what you have to ask.
I think she's just stretching.
Are you stretching? One here.
There you are.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for your great presentation. What is your view on, I think you often see where one student may have been significantly traumatized at a young age or something, and then maybe turns to substance abuse and potentially influences one of their friends to do the same. And I feel like access is also a big part, rather than resilience plays into, this is a bit of a segue from my question, but I find like that was probably the only thing in your presentation that I struggled with, was that I think that can be a bit damaging, to say that like someone didn't do drugs because of just resilience. Sometimes it can really be about access. I thankfully never was into weed growing up, but I also was never around it, thankfully. But a lot of kids in Cayman are constantly around weed, whether it be with their friends or even family members. And so it's not necessarily just about resilience. But my question was, when you have, like, your best friend has had significant trauma and then they turn to drugs, and because you want to stay friends with them, you then do the same thing, and you maybe didn't have the same trauma, but then you both get caught. Should you be punished differently then?
All right, so let's address a couple of things. And I'm glad when she said drugs, she automatically thought marijuana. What's the most common substance abuse? Alcohol. Who doesn't have access to alcohol? No, I'm not saying who doesn't have alcohol in their house. I'm saying who doesn't have access to alcohol. Okay, so if you wanted it, would you know where to get it? That's the point. So someone who's going through a particular difficult time, if they want drugs, they know how to get it. Because alcohol is sold readily, there is always access to alcohol. And it's the most common substance abused worldwide because it is accessible. Most of the children using e-cigarettes aren't hiding anywhere. They go to the corner store and they get it. It's easy to get, right? But if you're resilient, your coping skills are more functional. So the first thought wouldn't be, maybe if I had this drug, I could take it to alleviate my distress or to feel better about myself. You could say, maybe there's a responsible adult I can talk to. Maybe I can write. Maybe I can journal. Maybe by being a part of the football team. Maybe by having some fantastic thought in my mind. And you can think of a million ways. Because you are resilient, your first option isn't to rely on drug. But everybody in every country has easy access to drug, right? And we saw during the lockdown, initially, the outlets were closed. And what had to happen? They had to reverse that position. Because remember, we said before, persons are using substance most of the time to self-medicate. They are not addicts. But when you're locked up the first time and you realize, oh my God, is this my kid that I'm telling people, this angel? Jesus Christ. I just need a shot to take the edge off. But all the bars are closed. All the outlets are closed. But we can always access substances, right? So access is not an issue in any country. It becomes the type of substance that you may be accessing, but persons will always access the most available substance, right? So there are some communities where if you try to go and buy alcohol, the shopkeeper will run you out. But you can get a spliff very easily, and you can never get any alcohol to drink. All right, second part, no child should be punished for using substance. So that's the message I would want everybody to leave here with. So I wouldn't even quibble about who should be punished differently. I'm saying punish neither of them. And if your friend offered you a drug and you took it for a reason. You wanted to bond with that person, you wanted to identify, or maybe you really wanted it, but you didn't feel brave enough, and now you thank God you offer, because I wasn't going to risk getting catch. But now that you're giving me, that risk of getting caught is gone, and I can just take the drugs. So that would be my answer to that question. Pathways to cure, not punishment. I see Shannon Seymour. Oh, well.
Hi, my question is, what spaces or industries should the youth start to tiptoe their way into to kind of derail any relationships with like the misuse of different substances? So for example, I'm new to the island, but what I've noticed is water sports is huge here. I have a couple of friends who are local to the island who have said to themselves that they find that there's less trouble on the water than there is on land. I also found something similar with people taking up in the agriculture field. For example, last night I saw that film Beacon Farms by Candy would occur, but I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on different industries that youth should start to consider when trying to find a path or relationship with their island outside of substance misuse?
All right, so that's a very, so let me see if I understand your question. You're saying if a youth wants to avoid using substance, what area extracurricular activity should they get involved in? Right. So I would say it's more complicated than that, right? Because we have to consider the environment that children are growing up in. And if you remember that slide, we're saying that the brain will do the thing that is most rewarding, and we'll seek that out, right? So if to go, for example, snorkeling means that my parents have to approve it, I have to sign a drowning waiver, and I have to pay for it, or, Tom's mom is rich, so he can buy drugs and I get half of it for free. Which one would you choose? So it would be that kind of thing. So what we'd have to look at, again, is in terms of therapeutic and intervention approach to look at what are children doing now, right? And if we're identifying mental health symptoms, channel them through counselors, mental health providers, and then they can dictate what they're interested in, because nothing is universally interesting, right? But I get that point that the more resources that we have, the better. But the other part of having resources is that to run anything, you need money to operate it. So how accessible is it from the perspective of money? And water sports tend to be very expensive, for example. So we're looking at, again, at policies to develop social connectedness, so community centers, what the schools do, government level, non-governmental entities, and having a variety then persons can choose, but no one pathway would be better than the next because nothing is universally appealing.
Hi, Dr. Oh, I've got a microphone. Hi, Dr. Davis. Thank you for your presentation. Two things. One, I was really glad that you spoke about school exclusion because I was at the, I think it was International Men's Day, and they did a breakfast, the Family Resource Center, and there was an individual from the Ministry or the Department of Education who gave some pretty startling statistics that looked at the gender differences between men and women in our population versus how that compares to enrollment in preschool and attendance in preschool. And I think already the exclusion, particularly of our rowdy boys, is already happening as early as preschool. So for whatever reason, boys are being sent home or boys are not being sent because parents anticipate that there's going to be a problem. So they're not having access to what could be a really nurturing, supportive environment and protective factor. So I do think the issue of exclusion is a really important one, and I think from the recreational perspective as well, the question from the other participant was oftentimes those kinds of organizations also expel when a kid is in trouble. I'm very involved in youth football, and we try to take the approach that you're taking, which is when a kid is kind of struggling or it's come to our attention, we just layer on the eyes, we layer on the wrapping around of that kid as opposed to the kicking out of that kid.
Yeah, and Dr. Edwards will speak later about a kid has to be regulated for them to participate in anything. So regardless of the activity, they would need to be regulated, and so sometimes they have to come through professionals first to get them regulated so that they can attend.
My question is, thank you for opening, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for saying it. As an educator in New York and as an educator here, there's something that you said that I noticed happening with parents, and that's why I want to thank the Pantons for being so obvious, for being so open about it. Once there is anything to do with mental health, our parents tend to shut down, and therefore the children do not get help. Here is the same thing, and when you tell a parent, okay, there is a problem with your child, they go into denial, and this child will come from primary straight through high school, straight into college with the same problem. How soon if you do it, and I wish you would do, how soon do you think we can educate these parents about what mental illness is and how to approach it? Because we go after parents for truancy, but we do not go after the parents for helping these children who are having these traumatic incidents and episodes at school. So we constantly have this violence that can't be cured because the parents will not sign off in getting their child access or do anything at all.
All right, so I think that's a very good question, but I will just context something a little. Most parents in denial are not choosing to be in denial. But imagine if you have a child, you would have wanted a certain trajectory, and your brain would literally reject anything that would tell you otherwise. So I want my kid to become a Rhodes Scholar, and the kid has an intellectual disability. This doctor is terrible, does not know to assess children. Nothing is wrong with my perfect kid, because that's the future that I imagine. So sometimes we have to be mindful of the struggles parents are going through as well. As early as possible is what I would say, but that is where policies would come in. So for some institutions, what they do, for example, at the pre-K level, is that if you're a parent and you're going to put your child there, they would have mandatory parent training sessions, and they would have top-up sessions. And your kid can't stay in the school unless you come and attend those sessions. So it might seem very regimented, but that kind of operation where the teachers, the principal, the parents, everybody operating on the same framework, those children have the best outcome. So we probably have to look at our policies. If we're going to enroll children in any school, that parent training has to be a part of it, and that's a necessary part of children getting into school. Suggestion, not saying you have to, just suggest.
Hi, I work as a teacher, and I've worked with a lot of children who have a lot of ACEs and who also have diagnoses of ADHD. And a lot of my colleagues will say, well, actually, I see a lot of children with a diagnosis of ADHD engaging in substance abuse. And so I just wanted to ask you to clear something up for colleagues and teachers. Does trauma cause ADHD?
All right, so sometimes things co-occur, and it might look like one causes the next, right? So when we speak about ADHD, strictly speaking, is a condition happening during the developmental period, right? When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, they're happening around the same time. And the response to trauma can look the same as ADHD. So for example, as a core feature of being hyperactive and impulsive is that persons will get in trouble because they cannot regulate, is the word, Dr. Edwards, they cannot regulate themselves and they will act out. But what is 100% true is that if you have diagnoses like ADHD, you are more likely to be traumatized, right? Because you're in school, if attention is the issue, you're not learning, the teacher's not going to be pleased, the parents are not going to be pleased. If you're hyperactive, you're getting into fights. If you're impulsive, you're getting into arguments. But there's this thing that if you smoke it, you just feel calm. We get it? Yeah. There's a monitor saying my time is up, so I'm not sure if there are allowances, moderator. I'm not sure.
I think there's a couple more questions. We can take a couple
All right, we can take a couple more questions.
One more question.
Thank you very much. My name is Daphne Orat, and you were speaking about alcohol and its effect on young people. Of course, that translates into, when they become older, the same problem. By far, it is probably the worst drug that we face in Cayman. I remember when the legal age for drinking was 21. I remember when that was changed to 18. Because someone in the Legislative Assembly decided that if you could vote at 18, you should be able to drink. I don't know where that idea came from, but you vote once every 4 years, and alcohol is available 24/7. 7. I personally know the effects of it. We were asked today to be transparent and open, and I can't give you all the details, but I know this. Handsome, ambitious, intelligent, smart, personable. I've seen that individual change into a monster. I've looked death in the face at least 6 times. Knife to my throat, almost choked to death, gun after me. You name it, I've seen it. And that's after being raised in a home where I was surrounded by love and respect by my father and my brother. But what I'm saying here, back to the alcohol question, there needs to be a change in that law where that is raised, the legal age is returned to at least 21. I managed a condo once when a couple came to me and said, we're going out for dinner. Can you tell me what's the age limit for, because we're taking our children. And then I said, well, 18. And they looked at me in consternation. 18? Oh, he said, back home it's 21. I said, yes, it used to be 21 here as well. What I'm saying is, alcohol is available, and there should be laws where when adults purchase alcohol and it gets into the hands of underage teenagers, there should be something in place where those people are punished. If a young person is going to go to a place where alcohol is available, then they need to have an ID. But if an adult purchases it and then in turn shares it with an underage, there should be a punishment for that.
Okay.
Marijuana may not be the best thing for us, but I can tell you this, there's no drug, I know what I'm saying, no drug to compare with the abuse of alcohol.
Thank you for sharing, and that must have been difficult, and you were very brave for sharing that. But I just want to revisit something I said. The main thing from a therapeutic perspective that I try to do and my other colleagues is not to look at the individual substance, but to look at what's the reason why that substance is being used. And what you're saying is very true. If you made alcohol less accessible, persons would use alcohol less in an illegal manner. In a legal manner, sir, because the age would have changed. It does not mean that alcohol use would decrease. Think about it. Every teen using it illegally, but majority of the substance use is alcohol, marijuana. If alcohol production ceased and they start having alcohol in Cayman, what would happen is that person would shift to other drugs. In the Prohibition era, where they said no more alcohol, persons started to try and make alcohol, and that created a public health nightmare. Buildings were exploding. Persons were getting methanol poisoning. The gun Chicago typewriter came out of that era where they started to have very violent gangs competing. So we see and that's the reason why alcohol is still illegal, if you think about it. The drug that has the widest impact on the entire society is alcohol. So why is it still legal? People will self-medicate. We know this. They will always choose a drug to self-medicate, and then the drug will be villainized. But we're saying what we need to look at, why are you self-medicating? Here is a treatment pathway that we can get you help. And the aim is not to just go in and say the drug needs to stop. No. What is your mental health struggle? Here is the support. Now that you're feeling better, you can use much less drug.
or even stop. So the focus is on helping the person and not getting them to stop using any particular substance, because people always choose something that feels good. And if it wasn't alcohol, it would be Burger King, KFC, Krispy Kreme. We're always going to do something to make ourselves feel good. That's just how the human brain is designed.
It's true. It's true. Okay, one more question from the audience, and then we'll wrap up. I think there was a question right here.
How can we create a safe space for children or young adults who use drugs to come forward because of the stigma around drug use or any substance use?
Right, so that's an excellent question. And that ties, that ties in exactly with what I'm saying. So because the teenagers, and for the most part, teenagers using drugs are going to school, the safe space starts in school, where once someone is identified, it's not a punishment pathway. We're not looking at how many days do we need to exclude this client for, how soon do we need to get this client in the exclusion units, but to say, all right, this is an issue. Does our guidance counselor have the guidance counselors, do they have the capacity to handle the student? If not, build capacity. Does it need to be external to here? All right, maybe we can collaborate. Would it cost money? Is it something that we can provide for free? If this person felt better about themselves, or if they're having a specific mental health diagnosis, if it was managed, would they use substance less? The answer is 100% yes, and we see that in clinic all the time. Once persons get their mental health treated, the amount of substance they're using cuts down significantly over time. So the safe space for kids starts first with school, because that's the time that most of your waking hour will be spent at school. And then we're expanding it out into the community where parents are educated. When we look at facilities like Keys workers are trained to deal with traumatized children and to understand why they're using substance. Everybody in DAS, Ministry of Health, HSA, all the private entities that are interfacing with children just need to be on the same page.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. I think there's a lot of things for us to think about.
Yeah.
Obviously, we want to continue to educate parents, children, young people. We want to build more resilient kids, but we also need to make health care for mental health patients more accessible than the drugs and other illicit substances that they're turning to, because perhaps they're not able to access the care that they need as easily as they can access these other substances. So there's a lot for us to think about, and like Dr. Davis said, as a community to come together to try to work out solutions for.